Good morning and welcome to this panel on commercializing academic science. I don't know how many of you were in the previous panel, but one of the questions from the audience was this trend towards investors going earlier and earlier into looking for opportunities in the life sciences, and that's a trend that certainly is happening and certainly will continue to happen. So we therefore felt that this panel was very timely to share with you some of the experiences that each of us has had in that space, and to try to see how this interaction, which is very imperfect at the moment, can improve so that better investments can be made in the very early stage space. So my name is Juan Carlos Lopez, and I recently founded a company that's precisely interested in this problem, how to identify good academic science that then can be introduced to knowledgeable investors. And I'm particularly interested in looking for science in other parts of the United States that are not Boston and San Francisco, because I think those are well served. But there's a lot of good science out there, and to me that's a fascinating problem to solve. So before that I worked at Roche, where I had a similar role looking globally for opportunities for the company, and before that I worked at Nature, where I got exposed to a lot of good science, and where I developed this interest in this particular problem. So I want to thank Life Science Nation for giving us the opportunity to talk about this problem. And when we discussed the panel before coming here, what we thought would be useful to get the discussion going was to let each of the panelists introduce themselves and talk about their own experiences, focusing perhaps in one or two examples in their search for partnerships with academic institutions and with very early stage opportunities, and try to learn some lessons from there and what they've learned from past experiences, hoping that those experiences would be helpful to you as members of the audience. So with that, I think we can go directly to my left and let Cynthia introduce herself, and then after that we'll continue going left.
Thank you, Juan Carlos. So just before I started, how many academics in the room?
Well, there's one.
There's one. My name is Cynthia Lavoie. I now have my own consultancy. I'm currently helping companies think carefully about what type of funding and financing they need for their companies, and then I try to help identify potential collaborators for them or investors for them. This stems from my 15-year career in venture capital. My last role was as general partner of TVM Capital, which was a fund that was global, with offices in Montreal, Munich, and around the world, where we looked at very early investments from a VC's perspective, but potentially not so early from an academic's perspective, and I'll get into that in a moment. And then spent another 9 years with another fund where we invested quite early still in preclinical platforms all the way through to revenue generating companies. So we were asked by Juan Carlos to talk about two challenges we noticed or come up against as we were making investments or doing what we do individually, and in my case, looking at investments. And I can say there are two that are really, there's a common theme to both, but there are two things that we did find were a challenge. When we tried to invest in what we called early stage companies, we would invest in a product, in a compound, or what pharma likes to call a candidate. And the definition of that in the therapeutics world was difficult. It was difficult to find a common language sometimes with academia, because what academics do extremely well is target validation and discovery. But creating a product is not what academics get recognition and esteem for. It doesn't publish as many papers. It's not as interesting potentially. And then the other item that we fell against is once we had identified a product that might be of interest to us to invest in, there's a difference in culture that has to happen, where you move from a reward system that is about esteem and recognition, and it moves to monetary gain. And that is something that's interesting, and I'd like to explore it with yourselves and the rest of the panelists on the panel. But it's something that's important for a researcher to recognize that a venture capitalist can't fund the lab. A venture capitalist can only invest in activities that are accretive to the value of the product. And so I'll leave it at that for now, because I'm sure my fellow panelists will add to those two things, but it's something I'd certainly like to explore and question and answer.
Okay, so it's kind of interesting to me that this room is kind of less full than the previous room, and I think it kind of reflects somewhat, you know, the paucity of people who are prepared to take on this challenge. Yeah? I mean, this is really difficult stuff. It's so early, and there are so, you know, not even Nobel Prize winners can tell you, you know, what the stuff is that's going to turn into the assets that are going to go into the clinic. So nobody really knows. So the people who are doing this, there's very few boutiques that think about early stage. And I think the difference between what we heard in that previous panel and what we're talking about here is, you know, there's two you know, major routes that one could think of. One route is licensing of assets from an academic lab that we know of, and the other is, you know, forming a startup. And to form a startup, my experience, which comes from the fact that so Nature Biotech and Nature Medicine, we're kind of unicorns in the world of journal editors in that we actually think about commercialization a little, and we run these networking events for young faculty to actually meet with investors in their local clusters, whether it's Boston, we've run them in the Bay Area, here in San Diego, in Houston, we've done them in London, we run an event in Singapore, and every place is different because the audience is different in that event. But the one thing that we see is that there's just a handful of people who really know, you know, what it is about kind of early stage, and they are kind of overwhelmed with people coming to them with opportunities. So then it becomes, there's kind of two things that I see. There's this issue of discovery in a world in which there are something like 15 million scientists, and it's growing like 4 to 5% each year. There's something like 1.5 million papers published each year. But the actual people that we really want to target for startups as company founders, it's a tiny percentage point of that universe. So how do you discover them? And then the next, even if you could discover them, then the next problem that you have is how do you get access? And what most of the VC funds that, you know, I see who kind of work with academics, what they do is, you know, it's a very long-term process. So they cultivate key opinion leaders, KOLs, and they use that network to build people and, you know, portfolios of founders that then come together to form something that they could create into a company. But it's a very small number of people. But I think, you know, for me, that's the interesting question: discovery and access.
I'm Bill Kohlbrenner. I'm CSO of LSN. I joined LSN about 3 years ago, and I have a pharma background. So taken together, I have experience on both the buy side and the sell side of technology funding. Just a quick couple of comments about LSN. We're in a unique position because we're right at the interface between early stage companies in need of funding and investors who can provide that funding. We provide tools and services to early stage companies looking for capital. And this has provided me with a really interesting view of the sell side. In addition to our RESI meeting that we're sponsoring today, we have a global database of investors. We take on branding and messaging clients, small companies who are raising money and want to tune up their slide decks or their websites. We also have an iBank, Boston Innovation Capital, that will actually run fundraising campaigns for companies who don't want to or who aren't in a position to. We also have services on the buy side. We offer sourcing service that can help clients who are interested in licensing assets or acquiring companies. And they typically don't have sufficient BD capabilities, or they really want to come up to speed. They're a foreign company, they want to come up to speed in the US market, or they want to stay in stealth mode. So we offer that. However, most of my buy-side experience comes from working in pharma, and this has provided me with a lot of exposure to the challenges of accessing academic technologies. I spent most of my career doing discovery research at AbbVie, formerly Abbott, looking for new antibacterials, antivirals. I moved into the oncology space. And spent a lot of time looking for new targets and platform technologies. Ultimately, and this is where I really got involved in exploring the academic world, I moved to business development, where I headed a global scouting team searching for assets, pipeline assets, and technologies from universities all over the globe. And this is always interesting, but making progress in the academic world, sourcing those assets is always challenging. And I put these into several buckets, and I think the themes are already starting to repeat themselves. The first is, how do you uncover promising technologies? That is really, really tough. You can make a cold call to a university, a tech transfer office, and the conversation may start with, well, let me show you my binder of available assets, to which you can reply, no thanks, I want to see the good stuff. And you really, that's really not a productive way to go. You almost immediately encounter some headwinds. So I'm hoping that through the conversation today, we can land on more productive approaches to doing that. The second bucket is managing stakeholder expectations. There's always a big, reaching agreement on value of an academic stage asset is always an interesting conversation. And if you are an investor or a pharma company that's basically out fishing, a lot of small issues can get in the way of doing this, even the CDA, the scope of the CDA. There was one case with the university we were very interested in looking at a technology. It took, we wanted a two-way CDA. It took a year to move that forward to the first draft, and what came back to us was a one-way CDA where we were the ones sharing information. The university didn't want to share anything. So these kinds of things, they don't happen all the time, but they can really slow things down. And I think the solution to a lot of that is, how do you build trust? So that's really the thread that goes through this. Next is managing buyer risk. Does the technology work? How do you validate it? There are cases where published studies or technologies that you hear about, you bring them in-house, they don't work as advertised. So that's a big issue. And these licensing approaches really come with you can mitigate the risk by establishing a pharma can, by establishing a collaboration with the university PI, work with them, look at the technology, evaluate it, share data, and so on. That can be a productive way of validating the technology. But I think investors per se have less flexibility, less options to do those kinds of things. I guess it's possible, but there's less flexibility. And then and we've already bumped into this one, how does a commercial entity like an investment group structure a technology deal with an academic institution? I mean, what are you investing in? One possibility is spinning out a company, licensing the technology, spinning it out. A build-to-buy situation may be in collaboration with a pharma who can help the investor guide them towards a specific area. But one final comment, I think most academic PIs have at least some understanding of the value of their technology. In today's world, most are fairly savvy, and they're either interested or they're not interested in commercializing it. But there are cases where maybe they don't understand how their technology could be used. Maybe in the med tech area, for example. And I think it's really important to find ways to uncover these technologies, make them more visible, so that all the potential utility can be explored.
Great. Well, well, it's a pleasure to be here, so thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. And one of the nice things about being on this panel is that I'm surrounded by folks who have really cut their teeth in trying to address and commercialize academic science. So I lead an organization that was formed some 14 plus years ago, originally in Seattle. And the concept for Accelerator was actually pretty simple. I mean, actually we were the first group in the country to coin the term accelerator before everybody and their mom decided to use that for the concept of incubating and accelerating company building. But the concept for us was actually a little bit more unique in that we were trying to, as a group, build a collective set of tools to attack early stage science in a way that was syndicated, meaning that you can bring together several really bright groups who have tried to do this, but doing this on their own was sort of a bit daunting. But the concept was bringing together a group of very talented people all under one roof with a set of skills and capabilities to be able to go out and look for early stage science, and then to have a toolkit in place so that you can actually take early science that you see that's promising and can very quickly turn that into a company that in fact had enough behind it that venture firms would actually fund it, and fund it to a point where you could actually get to an inflection point that mattered. And so the experiment was started well before I joined Accelerator. We've been around now for 14 years, and I took over Accelerator about 4 years ago, and was on the board of the previous Accelerator operation. And then I orchestrated an expansion, and so now we operate sort of in a bi-coastal situation where we have offices in Seattle and in New York City. What we have today is pretty unique. We have 12 stakeholders that we've brought together to attack this problem, 4 of whom are pharmaceutical strategics, AbbVie being one of them, Eli Lilly, which happens to actually be one of TVM's largest limited partners, J&J and Pfizer. They're all direct investors, and I have board representatives on the Accelerator. That's accompanied by a group that includes Arch Venture Partners, Alexandria, Harris & Harris Group, the partnership fund for New York City, and then my old firm that I've worked for some 14 plus years, WRF Capital in Seattle. And so the concept there that we started with is the same concept that we're applying today, which is, can you bring together sort of best of breed ideas on attacking early stage, primarily university-based intellectual property or ideas, and then can you translate them into startup companies? And the takeaways I guess that I would want to leave everybody here in this room with is, number one, this is a damn hard business. I can tell you a million stories where we've been very successful and have resulted in companies that have raised more money and have ultimately got to a point where they've been successful. But I can also tell you an equal number of stories where we almost lost our ass or ran into a situation where we started with a technology or an idea, and then all of a sudden, 3, 6, 9 months down the road, either it didn't work or it didn't work the way that we thought it was going to work, or we flat out got data that just didn't reproduce what we thought we were going to want to see. So the business is hard. And then the other piece I think I want to leave with you guys is that one of the biggest challenges that we've had in this business is really a function of education, right? We come across a lot of very talented PIs and scientists, and we source the world for technologies. We look at universities, and we go to a lot of the places where people don't often look. So we avoid the you know, the Bostons and the San Franciscos, and that's kind of why we're in Seattle and New York. And in fact, if you look at the scope of the deals that we've done over the year, they've come from places like, you know, Johns Hopkins, University of Iowa. We did one from Penn State. We're closing a deal now that's coming from Case Western. So it's a broad range of different institutions that come from all over the country, but they're not necessarily the ones where you've got 50 venture firms sitting there and knocking on the door. And one of the things that we have found that is often, you know, challenging in putting these deals together, and I say challenging because on average, and I'll kind of tie into what some of my colleagues have said, it takes a long time to put these things together. It's not like you can walk in, see something that you really like, and then a month and a half later you've got a startup company there. On average for us, most of the companies that we have formed from the ground up generally take about a year, if you can believe that. From the time when we first see the science to the time when we literally are finalizing paperwork and getting ready to put real dollars into those opportunities. I think that all of you guys can probably test that as well. And the reason it takes a year is because some of the things I think that Bill had alluded to is absolutely accurate. Negotiating contracts with universities can be a royal pain in the ass. And it's not because people's intentions are not well designed, but it's more that, you know, there may be a legacy history there where a university may have gotten served a bad deal in the past and they're trying to protect against that, or quite frankly, they think that they have something that's more valuable than it really is. And they think that we're dealing with a phase 3 asset when it's really, you know, something that's at the discovery stage and it needs a lot of optimization and money to make it work. And so you run across this tension where, you know, as the investor, you have the idea that you want to really push things forward and you're still taking a lot of risk. And by the way, there's a huge amount of risk, even after we put our money in, that we're going to lose all our money going forward in the next few years. And so we're trying to balance the needs of getting a good deal from the university to start the company and giving the university enough to feel like they've gotten a fair deal without feeling they've gotten screwed. So I think there's a lot of education that still needs to happen there, and I think it's slowly starting to change, but certainly still needs a lot of work there. And then I think the other side of it is continued education with PIs on the scientific side. So the other challenge that we face in putting these kinds of deals together is that when we deal with, you know, scientific PIs, you have a gradient of experience. Some are very talented. I mean, we've worked with the likes of folks like Luke Campley who have started companies and have had a lot of success, all the way to PIs who have never started a company, but have a really interesting technology, want to start a company, and then they've gotten advice from Uncle Buck, who doesn't really know how to start a biotech company, but has given them some bad advice and has kind of, you know, created some expectations that are often are difficult to overcome. So I think there also needs to be continued education there on the PIs, irrespective of the level of talent, and it's one of the things that frankly takes us a lot of time. That's why it takes a year or so to do these deals, because in the process of us putting these deals together, we're educating the PI about what we want to do, how we want to do it, and how ultimately we want to partner. And at the end of the day, for us, when we do a deal, I have to be able to look at the PI and be able to say, hey, look, we're in this together. Yeah, we've negotiated a deal with you guys, and you're not getting everything you want, but at the end of it, we set that all aside, we work our ass off, and we hope that we can create something that's more valuable. And sometimes it works, many times it doesn't, but at the end of the day, we try to do that with a sense of fairness and you know, we try to contribute to the science. And so those are kind of the themes that I want to touch on, which I think, you know, obviously this very talented, you know, group of panelists have, I think, all kind of touched upon, and I would love to kind of pull some of that more apart. And frankly, I'd like to get some of the audience in here to share some of their perspectives in this as well, because I think it'd be pretty interesting to kind of to hear what your collective experiences have been in this area.
Yeah, thanks to the four of you for your thoughts. I think that everything you said is completely true, and we've heard a lot of different points that are very, very important and recurring topics, like earning people's trust, the educational piece, the finding the right people to and the right projects, and the long time it takes. All of that makes perfect sense, and it's true. We could go and dive deep on that, but it's also true that it's probably better to hear now if there's any reaction from the audience, so that we can build up on that.
It'd be kind of interesting also, it'd be kind of interesting to know who are you? And why are you here? Because there aren't many of you here in the audience, so could you tell us who you are?
Sure, my name is Richard. I'm founder of a company in LA called Green Wings Biomedical, and we are in the translational stage. We look at the IP that we're talking about today at research institutions, partner with the PI in whatever partner means, different situations, different relationships, always leaving the PI as a PI, because we become the acting entrepreneur, so we're not investing in the PI's company. If the PI wants to be CEO, they can go talk to other people. We're the acting entrepreneur, we form the company, take over the project and the translational with a, high aspiration to have an early exit soon, either soon before or soon after the regulatory approval. And look at certain, narrow focus, the devices we look at. In fact, the IP we look at is algorithmic, so we look for algorithms that will create better, faster, cheaper devices, some of which fill needs that are unmet with existing modalities, technologies, procedures, whatever. So other than working with technology transfer offices, which are ranging from insane to stupid, sometimes clear, for the reason that you exactly mentioned, which is their vision of what the IP is worth at that time is very confused. And I generalize, it's not always the case, of course, we go to places where that's not the case. I think the biggest challenge, in fact, I know that the biggest challenge is the runway. If you build it, they will come. Question is when, all right? I mean, we all go through the CMO, the CMIO, we don't need this because we're all brilliant doctors, right? I exaggerate here, So it's that runway between today and when will this become accepted enough in practice that a acquirer will come and take it all out because of that. That's the biggest uncertainty for us, How do you gauge the market? And just, if I may, for one last comment, we had a great technology looked at at USC jointly with Children's Los Angeles. And I spent 1.5 years, probably more than I should have, trying to figure out when would this become a big company, and I couldn't figure out that it would ever be a big company, even though very clear unmet need, problems where the clinical issues that this solved were pretty significant. Probably the customer wouldn't pay a whole awful lot for it because of, just how medical providers pay for anything, if they pay for anything at all. So that's the biggest challenge for us.
Could I follow that up with a question? You pointed out the difficulties at times in dealing with the TTOs. How do you source assets for your business? I mean, how do you find
I'm very deeply networked in LA.
Okay.
The thing with the TTO, just to add to that, other than their delusion as to the worth, is really the timing. They have a pressure to license, right? Even startup, non-startup. And they ask questions that you can't answer. So, well, where's the business plan? And we need to have a minimum license royalty stream by year X. And if you don't meet your target, it's like, this isn't the lab. You having to guess. So that's the thing that we find. But no, we're deeply now. We're finding in LA, at least for us, possible candidates to look at. It's actually more than we can handle. It's the next step where we find it brutally difficult.
I have a kind of
So that's me. Now that you know.
Well, that prompts me to ask the question. So, because of the dynamics in an academic institution between the faculty and the TTO, how, and I'm interested in everybody kind of chipping in here, like if you have a relationship with a member of faculty in a academic institution, how does that grease the wheels with the TTO? If you've already established the trust. It depends.
Oh, totally. In fact, it's vital. In our opinion, without that, you have the worst possible outcome. It's going to be awful, brutal, boring. They're going to scoop you. If you have a good relationship with the PI, they trust that you're adding value. Of course, you have to add the value, right? It can't be just optics. Then it's critical. Without that, in our opinion, there's nothing to follow.
But the important point that you raised, and I think comes from your question as well, Richard, thank you, is there's a pressure, Richard, that you mentioned, by TTOs, which will address your question as well, to license. So they do need to meet certain numbers. It's more important for them to bring cash back into the lab and to get royalty streams than it is to get in essence, what we would call, what I would call certainly a success, which is
Yeah,
for
yeah.
sale in a 3-year period, or a large partnering with pharma that brings in significant wealth to all of their shareholders and the equity holders in a project, company, whatever it may be. And it's been proven out. If you look at the history, there's only a number of examples of a lot of money going directly to universities, not through a company. There's Emory for an HIV drug, which I think made 500 or so upfront, which was very interesting. And then there was another one I could find was MRC and Scripps, but that had happened post. It had happened due to a suit where the cash then came back directly to the institutions. In most cases, to get the really big bucks, like Jounce Therapeutics getting a big deal with Celgene for $2.5 billion and then doing an IPO, it took that 3 years that they spun it out and developed it as a business with folks like Richard and other folks in this audience and people on the panel, especially to my right and left. That's where the lack of understanding is. The academics, the TTOs are sort of tunnel vision in terms of what they need to meet for the next 3 years. And I think there's a couple of examples out there that they point to of institutions getting the big payout, but it's actually rather rare. Has that been your experience? And
Yeah, I mean, I would say so. I mean, I look at Seattle, and one of the last deals I did at my prior firm was we made an investment in Juno Therapeutics. And Juno has made a fortune for 3 institutions, one of which is the Fred Hutch. And the reason they made a fortune was because A, they had an equity stake in Juno, which took a very rapid rocket ride to the public market. But in addition to that, there were success payments that were baked into the deal, that if the company was successful by a valuation measure that was laid out pretty objectively, that if those hurdles were met, then the university, the institution would actually get pretty big payments, $25 million payments, another 25. So the Hutch is actually going to collect some $50 million in payments just from the milestones. And then on top of that, they have an equity stake that is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And that's one transaction. And that's made more than a good chunk of their entire licensing stream that they'll probably see for the next 5-7 years, easily. And it's some of it is historic because a lot of the tech transfer offices. I mean, we have relationships with many, but I can just tell you that from the standpoint of us doing deals, we've never had tech transfer lead us to an opportunity that we've ultimately ended up investing in. In almost every situation that we've done a deal in, it's always come through the PI or a group of PIs or an area of science that we have found interesting where we've stitched together 2 or 3 PIs. We're closing a deal next week actually, and the deal actually comes from 3 universities that were working collaboratively in an area. One of the universities kind of took a lead role in this, but the asset itself had been kind of sitting there and being kind of picked away at by the PI with some grant funding, and we actually uncovered the technology and had been seen by some other strategics, but none of them had ever actually thought about putting this into a company. And we actually found a couple of indications that weren't really obvious to some of the investors that actually allowed us to turn the tide. And we're going to put close to $6 million behind that effort to push the molecule forward. So I think I can't really blame the tech transfer offices because their job is very functional. Their job is to orchestrate a contract and to protect the university's interests economically, but they don't tend to be the groups that have really creative ideas about what to do about assets. And the extent to which they have those good ideas, it generally are those groups that have been doing a good job of bringing in outside folks to help them. And there are a handful of universities, for example, that we've worked with in New York who do a pretty good job of that. They involve pharma partners and venture firms and groups like that. They've set up translational funding mechanisms within the universities to take things a little bit further. And I think through that kind of work, it's gotten them to be a little bit more savvy about how to help start new companies and work early stage technologies. And so I think, by and large, I mean, this challenge is largely put on the professionals' table to handle and do in the way that they see. And like I said, it's still a risky game. I mean, even when we think everything looks good, I mean, there's still a good chance that we're going to fail anyways. So we try the best that we can, and we just hope that we can educate people along the way in doing that.
Yeah, I think there was a question there, you had your hand raised, right? And the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, Andrew asked why we're here. So my company, Thrive Bioscience, in the Boston area, we're automating cell culture and stem cell culture and analysis of cells in a controlled environment and using image processing, which surprisingly has never been done. And I came because we're interested for a few reasons. One, we're interested in the issue of reproducibility because cell culture being manual, there's huge variability in the quality of the cells, the types of cells. There's genetic drift from the environment. And so I was interested in panels view on that issue. We also, we're 3 years old and we filed 11 of our own applications, but I've licensed in 10 issued patents from several academic institutions, and so was interested in that. And then also, third, I'm interested in, as part of commercializing a new product, a new technology, I'm also interested in how one, the cycle of original research or a new publication and how long it takes to be published, and the different platforms that there are, because we have a pretty game-changing technology that can change research, and we have collaborators at the Broad and Harvard Stem Cell Institute that are redoing experiments and getting different results, and they want to publish. And one of the difficulties early stage companies have is that the length of that cycle, we can iterate more quickly sometimes on the product development side, and then it's very slow to be published, and other things like posters that can be helpful, or white papers. So those are kind of the three issues: essentially reproducibility, licensing in, and the cycle of publication.
Well, the two of those are squarely in your playground, right? And then maybe you can start by
So
taking all of that.
the reproducibility issue, I think clearly a work in progress, but in thinking about this and talking with VCs, I mean, for instance, we collaborate with Bruce Booth, who's been involved in this reproducibility initiative, and I mean, it's a great source of frustration to them that they start on projects and then they kind of start to aim to replicate them, but problems arise during that process. The thing that kind of comes out with this is that some of this is just early stage science. It's biology. Yeah? It's like we can't get away from it. And in the media, you kind of hear like science is broken. No, science is not broken. Essentially, it's just really, biology is very difficult to do. Yeah? And I think one of the ways around this, and we think about this when we're kind of thinking about faculty that we would present to investors, and especially early stage faculty, is that that my personal view is there's no great secret to doing great science. The way you find people who do great science is they work with other great scientists. Yeah. So you just essentially, I think this kind of find those groups who do the best work, and then find the postdocs who are the first authors on the papers, then they leave and they form new groups. And very often when they form, it's kind of interesting because the investor idea about this is very similar to a journal's attitude to this, which is we go after those people when they're first starting out their lab because proactively, yeah? Because they're very happy that we've come to them, yeah? And because the people who are known, they're kind of oversubscribed, yeah? So that's one of the things that we do. We specifically target people who are from these labs that we know do good work. So that's one way of discovery. Now the timing thing, my personal belief, and I think if you talk to most investors and who are in the early stage, like publication is just way too late to be finding these people. Yeah, it's, you know, if you're waiting for the Nature Science Cell paper, you know, good luck to you. Yeah, but it goes back to what I'm saying about identifying who the right people are, talking to them before they, you know, sometimes, you know, it goes back to this question of finding people, creating the relationship, and then, you know, finding out what they're working on and what's interesting.
My issue is actually a little bit different than that. It's as a company that already has some science and is developing it further to to be published.
Mm-hmm.
And that length of time is it can be very painful. And often investors are looking for, which is very lucrative.
Have you thought about preprint service?
Yeah, so I was be interested in, you know, given where you are, some of your thoughts on what are some of the other channels or faster means that are available with some credibility.
Yeah. Well, I would say, you know, preprint, you know, the importance of preprint service is just going to grow and grow. Yeah. And, you know, the reason for that is like once you post the paper, you know, if it turns out to be something other people are interested in or there's something wrong with it, then the community will comment on it, and it has the speed. So I think what you will see is we will always need the kind of you know, top tier journals to tell us this is super high quality stuff. Yeah, but you can publish in a preprint server, and it doesn't preclude you from publishing in Nature or Cell anymore. You know, there used to be, you know, Cell, for instance, you know, had a very restrictive policy on this, where you had to talk to them before, you know, whether they would even consider it. But now, I think this is changing. Yeah?
I thought it was still
No.
precluded.
No, absolutely not.
That's good.
Yeah, so we're presenting on posters. It's also something that journals don't really consider to preclude subsequent publication. Was there another comment?
Yeah, I'm trying to connect the dots here with, it sounded like you have an enabling technology that any one of a number of companies in the biologics area could help them in their CMC process.
So we're selling primarily for research to pharma, biotech, research
Right.
institutes who are doing research, but we're getting pulled very quickly into GMP and
Exactly.
automating. Particularly, we automate iPSC culture and stem cell culture, and we're getting pulled very quickly into the production of biomanufacturing side.
So that's a huge deal to companies who are in preclinical and they're going through the GMP process. They have to get everything nailed down. So rather than not advertise, but rather than rely on publications to accelerate that business or those collaborations, just aggressively going out and hitting the pavement and talking to interested parties and networking. I assume you're already
Yeah, I
doing
mean,
that,
we
but
do
that
that. We
seems like
have
a
way
part.
more opportunities, and we have a backlog of like $25 million, and we're still a year away from launch. But there is still a desire for some
Sure.
academic credibility as well. And we didn't spin out of an academic institution, which is an interesting, slightly different path than when you start out with a great PI. And in fact, licensing in tech through tech transfer offices has been very helpful in giving us some of that credibility. But there is still to show the importance of cell culture and controlling all of the various variables. There's a need for, we're constantly asked by pharma, biotech, what kind of data is there, and they like peer-reviewed type examples of where by controlling the environment carefully, you got different results and why.
That's very interesting. Cool. So we have like 5 minutes left, and I want to know first if there are any other questions from the audience.
I was just hoping to hear that you guys have the magic solution that from working with TTOs have gotten a lot easier over the last decade. I'm not hearing that.
Easier is
Well,
not a
yeah.
word.
Let me say this, there's light at the end of the tunnel, right? I can just tell you from, investing out of Accelerator 4, which we've been doing now for going up, this is year 3 or whatever, 4. We've had deals where, in one case, I can point to a specific deal that we closed, where we negotiated with the tech transfer office, it literally took a month and a half. Beautiful, right? Then, on the other side of the equation, there was another one that we did where we started in February and it took almost a year to get through, negotiating a term sheet. So just the term sheet alone took 6 months. And then after that, we went to the contracts, and then there were research agreements, all sort of stuff. So, and that took about a year, and that was painful. And we were getting ready to close the deal next week, where we started on this thing in February, and it's dragged all the way out until now, June, probably July at this point. And it's been nothing short of painful. And, so it's, it depends on which institution, but, there's some that actually have gotten to be pretty efficient now. And I applaud them because they kind of see the bigger picture and they don't waste time on, little small things. But then there are other universities like the one that we're wrapping up a deal with now where they decide to, highlight things like insurance coverage and other stupid things that I've never had to ever negotiate before, but they decided to, put a spotlight on these things and spend time on that, which was completely unproductive and a waste of resources. But it's getting better. It's getting better.
You said it's terms stitched together. I mean, I think anybody that's been on the business development side or looking at investing has to be a master seamstress in the context of figuring out how you put those pieces together. In both the deal, but also then delivering on, lots of uncertainty. Biology, not the least of which is a big component of that.
So what I've seen in the space of tech transfer is that the institutions that have a lot of interactions with investors, with pharma, et cetera, are becoming increasingly sophisticated to how they think about this, right? And quite often what you see is that they are divorcing the sheer technology transfer aspect of it from what they call sometimes business development. So they get people who actually understand how this works, and these people are the ones who say this is a very big opportunity, and this is they sell this internally, so that then the technology transfer aspect is more of an operational issue as opposed to the people who are making the decision. So there's somebody with business expertise that then facilitates the deals. And I see that in some of the institutions in the Boston area, in New York, that's one thing that's changing a lot, and Fong alluded to that. But there's this vast ocean of universities where this is still unthinkable. So I think that's where the change needs to happen. And on the basis of what I've heard, it sounds like one of the key things that would be very helpful for the investor community will be to get more involved in this the educational aspect, so that these people are more open-minded about this. And there are events that do this, but it seems that it's really an unmet need. You know what, we have like 3 minutes left, so I would like to give each of you an opportunity to come up with a 30-second statement of something that you would like the audience to remember you by. So let's start with you, Tom, on the other side, and then come this way.
Well, look, I'll come full circle and say this is a damn hard business that we do. It's not easy, but at the end of the day, we're all trying to do the same thing, which is to come up with therapies that will help patients long-term and meet unmet medical needs. And that's what drives us to do this and to put up with all the things that we do to try to make this work. And so, as I was kind of saying to the last individual here who asked a question, there is light at the end of the tunnel, because we are seeing changes, improvement. People are trying to be more commercially oriented. And, damn, this is a fun business, right? I wake up every day and I get to work with some incredibly bright, talented scientists and people who have done this for years, like the folks on this panel here. And that's what this is all about. And so I would say, sort of in a more encouraging sense, continue to do what you're doing. I think we all need to play a role in this education piece, I think, as Juan Carlos had mentioned, and we certainly will continue to do our part, and hopefully this will get a little bit easier, and we'll see some more successes through startup companies.
Cool. Bill, you're 30 seconds.
Great. I think I also see movement away from the way things were in the past. I think what's come through here today, and I think has been developing for a long time, is the notion that to be successful at this, it's building relationships, building trust, and it's not going to happen with a single stop at the TTO. You really have to understand, you build trust, understand what different PIs are doing. In the case of pharma, they set up collaborations. If they're interested in immunology, oncology, they'll go to top tier labs, establish research collaborations, and through that mechanism really start to uncover what are really promising technologies. So it's changing, but the path is not a short one.
Andy?
So I think, agree with everything that's been said. I would say that, there's an opportunity, yeah? And the opportunity is that the institutions that aren't the kind of on the coast of the US, they are really keen. So, you go to the University of Illinois, and there are some actually pretty interesting people running the tech transfer at places like this, and that's because they're not in the top tier, and they're below the top tier, but there's some really great science going on. And so, I think, there's, as I said at the beginning, there's room here for people who have money, because there is a very large universe of people who kind of who have promising assets that could be taken forward, but never will see the light of day because they're surrounded by this ecosystem that completely stifles them. So, I think it's an opportunity.
Yeah, thank you. Cynthia?
Yeah, absolutely an opportunity. And as a venture capitalist, our job and my colleagues' jobs is to be a value add. And in being a value add, what we're trying to do is understand what these challenges are a bit more, and going in and trying to understand as well which institutions are more open to partnering with venture capitalists versus potentially focusing more on MTAs with pharma. And so it's really important, it behooves us to understand what the motivation is for these academic centers, and to try to accommodate if we can, and if not, of course, then we can try to educate, as Juan Carlos mentioned, and I think that can be helpful.
Thank you very much. Just to close, well, first of all, thank you everybody for coming, and second, to echo what Andy was just saying about all of this vast sea of people that I also alluded to, he and I are collaborating on a new project in which we are trying to tap into that vast ocean to see what we find. So if any of you wants to hear more about it and join us in that adventure, we'll be very happy to talk to you afterwards. So thank you again, and hopefully this was informative.